Human Nature, a journey in search of a peaceful and prosperous society with human nature as a guide. Led by your host, Adam Heyman.
Hello there, and welcome to Human Nature. I am very pleased to announce my guest for this episode, Domenic Scarcella. How you doing, Dom?
I'm doing very good, Adam. Glad to meet you face to face here after reading some of your work online. Very
thank
pleased to be
you.
here.
It was enjoyable interacting with you on Substack, the lovely platform that it is. Let me give you an intro. Domenic Scarcella is the author of a book and Substack, each titled Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen. Domenic's writing explores the ethical components of anarchism/voluntarism and the positive, substantive model of neighborliness and confrontation found in the historical record of Jesus of Nazareth. Let me give the subtitle also. Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen, Reflections on the Core Social Conflict Revealed by Jesus Christ's Way of the Cross.
That's the book, yes.
So, I have so many questions. I read it. It's a nice, tight little read, and it's filled with all sorts of interesting stuff. First of all, the Way of the Cross, that's a reference to the Stations of the Cross, yes?
Correct.
So, in Christian teaching, what is normally represented or meant to be instructive about focusing on the Stations of the Cross?
The Stations of the Cross in a few different Christian traditions call back to the fact that Christianity is a very earthy and historical religion, and it's also a pilgrimage religion. It follows on Judaism, which was also sort of a pilgrimage religion. People who were able to would make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem at certain high holy days. And early Christians would do some of the same things. And so walking the route through the city over to Golgotha, where the route that Jesus would have taken along his final moments toward being crucified, became a very just important thing. You know, baseball fans want to go to Fenway Park or Wrigley Field at least once in their lives. There's something about place that matters. And so the Stations of the Cross is a callback to the importance of place and the history involved. And you should learn that. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Is that why when you go see the stations depicted in a church, it sort of has you walk the way of the cross around, through the corners of the... I mean, it is a pilgrimage. Assuming you can't make it to the Holy Land, it is a pilgrimage that you walk within a large church, right?
Sure, and that's a good observation. They're in an order.
Yeah.
From the beginning where Jesus would have been condemned all the way around to not only being killed but taken down from the cross and placed in the tomb. And they do make a route. So if you were going in order, you would just move to the next closest one and the next closest one. Yes, it's one of those wonderful artwork things that you can look for in some worship spaces. And I always do when I go into a worship space. I like to look around and see if they have Stations of the Cross, and then to see the style of artwork that it's depicted in it. Art is a language, and
definitely.
It tells us something.
So would you say that for people who are first experiencing seeing the stations laid out that way and walking the tiny pilgrimage, so to speak, is it meant to make the viewer, the pilgrim, embrace what it must have been like, to suffer thusly, to be as Jesus was during that ordeal? Is it to try and take in some personal way what happened, or is there some other kind of teaching that's meant to be imparted?
I think it's everything that you just described. It could also be more. Studying history and culture and context, especially for something that happened long ago, is a good exercise in cognitive empathy. And I think that's very important. to understanding cultures. It's good even understanding your contemporaries,
Absolutely.
meeting
Yeah.
people for the first time. And I think I like to say to people who are getting into maybe reading on Christian literature that understanding history, culture, and context is way more important than being able to quote book, chapter, and verse.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something to that, and there's an aspect to the Stations of the Cross that, yes, it tries to put you there. Everybody likes a parade, right? This is a parade. The Romans would parade their victims through town because it served their purposes. It was supposed to scare people who might be non-compliant
Mm-hmm.
into maybe the getting their act together as the Romans saw it. It was a victory march, for those who are already on the Roman side, that, hey, we got them, and we're gonna send
It
them
was
to right.
it was the world's most famous perp walk.
Right. It is. It's a perp walk right to the execution area in full view. So everybody likes a parade, and you're out there at a parade, and you can put yourself somewhere along that route and say, gee, who am I in this?
Yeah.
And while it's easy to be on the side of the victim when you just imagine a story, like everybody cheers for the rebels in Star Wars, and then everybody goes out and worships the Empire, especially as you get nearer to the election, right? That happens. So it's a good exercise, a good perhaps meditative exercise if you're into meditation, like I am, to put yourself in a real historical setting, even if you don't know all the details. And the way I wrote the book is I didn't just write about what was happening then. I tried to connect it to the rest of not only Jesus's public ministry and the records we have of it, but what it means today. If you come away from reading about Jesus's ordeal thinking, oh man, those Romans are terrible, and that's where you stop, and you don't realize that those Romans are every government in the world, including yours and the ones you like. Then you miss the point.
Absolutely, which takes me to your theme, which I want you to dive into a little bit. It's called, Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen. So in your introduction, I very much liked your framing of what it means to be a neighbor and what it means to be a citizen. Yeah. So maybe talk a little bit about that, your overall theme, and maybe why you decided you wanted to write this book.
Well, I'll start with the last question first. I decided I wanted to write this book because I was trying to learn modern online publishing platforms.
Okay.
I was looking into some jobs at the time that were multimedia and that involved a lot of publishing. And in doing that, one big lesson I learned was, boy, you really need a book if you're going to learn this. There's just only so much you can read on Amazon before you realize, okay, I need a book. And then so I took some time and I said, yeah, I've been mulling over the Stations of the Cross. I've taught it before to people, not only in Christian context, but in extra Christian context. And it's been a favorite meditation of mine for years. Why don't I write a short book that could be a meditative aid on the Stations of the Cross? And so I took some time and I did that. And this is the point where I've rambled so much that I forgot the first part of your question. Can you?
Sure. Well, it's called Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen. I was wondering where you got the definitions for those two terms that you outlined quite nicely in the introduction.
Okay, well,
and then just your general thesis. What the?
Sure, it's one of framework. Yeah. It's not simply, open-mindedness. True open-mindedness isn't about simply hearing different opinions. It's about being open to the way you think and the way you process information.
Amen.
So a neighbor and citizen are different mindsets. And its proximate cause was me teaching a lesson to people. And the modern West is Christian culturally and nominally, but it's also very, very pro-government. Mm-hmm. And so the question, of course, comes up, well, if you're a Christian, you have to be a good citizen, right? It's your civic duty to vote and to get involved and da. And I said, well, be careful about that. Jesus is a good neighbor, but he's not really a good citizen. I mean, think about what happens to him. It's tough to make somebody out to be a good citizen that way. And if you don't mind me reading from the introduction here,
Sure.
I go through some very basic dichotomies between neighbor and citizen. Good neighbors treat each other as peers. Good citizens treat each other according to official status. Good neighbors seek the personal, intimate betterment of themselves and each other. Good citizens seek the external validation of an impersonal system. Good neighbors seek voluntary, open-ended interactions. Good citizens align to coercive civil authority and imposed hierarchical social order. Good neighbors insource their ethics. Charity and friendship are the key virtues of their relationships. Good citizens outsource their ethics. Compliance with the commands of rulers and enforcers is a fundamental and necessary aspect. Some might call it a civic virtue. Good neighbors consent. Good citizens conform.
So that's music to my anarcho-capitalist heart.
Oh, there you go.
Just to underscore that, I want to quote another passage.
Sure.
Page 44, quote, "Good cops kill Jesus, not bad cops, not rogue cops, not corrupt cops, good cops. The ones who obey orders and follow their training and protocols. The ones who care about their communities and keep the streets safe and secure. The ones who are just doing their jobs and trying to go home to their families. Hey, they don't make the rules, they just enforce them. Stop resisting." I love that. Yeah, so I mean, talk about that passage. Most people I assume most Christians reflexively believe in the rule of law and order, civilization and security and order and peace over chaos. And so they sort of reflexively back the blue and back the prosecutor and the DA. And I think it's good to know, to reflect always that the state isn't always the good guy,
Its tactics are never the good guy tactics.
Right.
Even if, some of the people involved, there's good and bad in each of us. Alexander Solzhenitsyn had a famous way of putting it that I'm going to butcher if I try to quote him exactly.
Oh, I will.
Go ahead.
The line between good and evil runs through each human heart.
Sure. Very good. Thank you.
One of my favorites.
That's music to my ears as well. Very good. Yes. The passage you quoted, I get asked about that a lot by anarchist voluntarists, because that's such an unusual thing to hear from a Christian culture. That is the dominant culture tends to be law and order and impositional and steeply hierarchical, just because it is. And since the time of Constantine, and I bashed this a little in the first chapter of the book, since the time of Constantine, the incentive structure changes for Christianity in that period. And
they go from the rebel to the empire.
Right. The incentive structure had been that, you're a good neighbor and you're avoiding imposing on other people. Human dignity is paramount, and so you're not going to violate people, even if you're trying to get them to agree with you. You wouldn't do that. Christianity spreads for about 2.5 centuries without being jerks to people. And then suddenly the incentive structure changes. Now, if you say you're a Christian, you get status for it. Now, if you say you're a Christian, you perhaps get better standing in society. You get more external validation from it. You get more opportunities. Rather than identifying as a Christian being a risk in your proximate area, it becomes this big reward. And that's a total change in incentive structures. And I imagine you being schooled in economics, saying you're an anarcho-capitalist, you understand as I do that incentives matter. And incentives tell you a lot about the system you're immersed in, and about the values that are being sort of nudged
On the
you-
margin, it's perfectly predictive. You
right?
know, and the incentives matter more than almost anything else. Yeah.
Sure. And so when I say good cops kill Jesus, they're towards the end of the book. I've been building to it. Like, I don't lead with good cops kill Jesus.
Right.
I try and lay out the case for a long time, and then we get to the portion of the events where Jesus dies on the cross, and that's where I basically drop the hammer. Good cops kill Jesus. This was not only not an accident, but it was done by people who thought they were doing good. And I say good cops there precisely because I want people to hear that and think about their own scenario, their own society, their own town, their own county, state, wherever they are. And so I use a very modern word there, because I want people to make the connection to their own time. I don't want this to just be something from history that people can kind of brush off. There's supposed to be a lesson to learning history that matters to you right now in your situation. It's not just a story to entertain you. And so I'm very glad that you pointed that out right away. What impression if I can ask a question, what impression do you have when you read that? And you've also told me privately that you don't come from perhaps a Christian perspective. So when you read that, what does it say to you?
That particular passage, or the
the whole good cops kill Jesus?
Well, I don't know. It's a big question. I'm not a believer. But I'm a creature of Western civilization, so obviously Christianity runs through me whether I like it or not, just like the Greeks and the Romans and the Enlightenment and all of Europe. I mean, I've been a libertarian for a long time. I know. Well, here's what it made me think of. Sometime during history, Christians moved from being the rebels and being using persuasion to influence the world, and agreement, voluntarism. They switched from being the empire and using coercion to enforce their goodness and whatever their perceived goodness on everybody. And it makes me think that the means are the ends. If you use evil means to try to accomplish what you think of as a good social order, it's a fool's errand. Because if you're using the initiation of force to accomplish that, it's a poison pill right from the start. You cannot achieve good by doing evil, and you don't have to believe in God to believe in good and evil.
It's logical.
Yeah.
If you understand that the ends don't justify the means, that evil means will taint whatever goal you think you're moving towards.
Have to.
And I go through that as well. Back in chapter 2, I say, but as Christianity during and after the reign of the Roman Emperor Constantine, which is early 4th century AD, becomes politically acceptable, the notion of carrying one's cross becomes distorted. After all, so-called Christians now occupy prominent positions within the hierarchical social order. So-called Christians share in the exercise of coercive civil authority. So-called Christians can violently impose the cross on others. What great progress for so-called Christian citizenship. What great loss for true Christian neighborliness. So I go through that early in the book.
Yeah.
And then we build and we go through, like, even if somebody is guilty, there's still something extra evil about a violent system now doing more evil to a person. And I give an example of Jesus refuting that as well. So by the time we get to Jesus dying on the cross, I think the audience is ready for it to hit home.
Yeah.
Good cops kill Jesus. And you talk about it being the kind of thing that maybe mainstream Christians wouldn't take to right away. I joke with people that I don't know that a lot of mainstream Christians have found my book yet, because I haven't gotten any 1-star reviews on Amazon or Goodreads. You know, when I start getting 1-star reviews, I'll know that there's
You'll
a
know you've
cultural
arrived.
Christian,
Yes.
right? Who found the book and just went, oh, no, government is good. You know, government is our Christian duty. We have to, you know, bishops tell me that every 4 years, especially when we're coming up to elections. And I just kind of roll my eyes and, you know, go off to what I'm there for. I'm a Catholic, but I don't attend mass for the wisdom of the clergy, because there's not always an indication that any such thing exists.
Am I hallucinating a little bit? You know, when I was younger, 70s and 80s, it sort of seemed axiomatic in our culture, American culture, that Christians were heavily statist. They bought into that. I mean, Reagan united the neocons and the evangelicals in that coalition of his.
Sure.
And it just seemed like, as you were saying, you know, part of the reason you wrote the book, to be a good Christian is to be a good citizen, worship the state. Some super religious people would think they've supplanted, you know, God with the state, unfortunately. But I'm noticing, I think, a shift that the most religious people I run across tend to be shifting away from worshiping the state towards libertarianism. Some of them go all the way to voluntarism or anarchism. Is that just wishful thinking on my part, or do you sense any of that too?
I sense some of it, but I wonder if that's because more people are actually doing that, or because, you know, I grew up in the 80s and some of the 90s. So I'm somewhat about your age and know what you're talking about there. You can meet all sorts of people, like, you know, on the interwebs. I'm in southern New Jersey right now, and you are not. And
No,
here
I'm
we
not.
are having a conversation. I wonder if it's because the information is more available if you dig for it with modern tools, or if there really are more people who are turning away from the state. I mean, maybe part of it is because the state has become so ubiquitous and so intrusive that people are like, wait a minute, I signed up for, you know, protecting people from robbery and rape and theft. I didn't sign up for telling me, you know, what products I have to purchase for my health or for my food, or you know, telling me how to run my business. You know, I didn't sign up for that. So I wonder if it's because government is metastasizing,
Yes.
and it's be presenting more of a contrast to people, or if people are sort of saying, I don't think this is right. And I think maybe it's a little of both, because as government metastasizes, people are confronted with what government really is. And then they come to their reckoning. You know, like what is it I really believe, and what is it that I really think is my highest value, the kind of thing that I would sacrifice for. Yeah, I say that people worship government. I'm not kidding when I say that, because I know what the word worship means.
Yeah.
If you hold something as a higher value, worship is a smushing together of the words worth and ship. It is your worthship. It is the thing that you think is worth so much that it colors the rest of your value system, and it's something you would sacrifice for. And government is like that for most people in the world, most people in civilization's history, including most Christians since the time of Constantine. So I do think they worship it, and I'm glad that people are being confronted by seeing maybe more of government for what it really is, and not being able to, you know, wear the rose-colored glasses around it so much. And I say that all governments are religions. You know, that's how they started, and that's what they are now. I still see online all the time, no matter how many times I ignore them, they're still in my news feeds. They're still in the side ads as I go to websites. You know, it's Uncle Sam kneeling at the foot of what's supposed to be a Christian cross.
Right.
I stand for the flag, but I kneel for the cross. And I just want people to imagine, do you think the early Christians were standing for the Roman flag? You think they had memorabilia from the Roman Empire in their catacombs as they were hiding from these people trying to kill them? You think they were putting the colors of the current emperor and you know, the Praetorian Guard up near their holiest places, near their altar? Do you think that was happening? The early church kneels for the cross. The early church does not stand for the flag. I'm an early churcher. I'm trying to get back to the Christianity that did not have the warped incentives of coercive civil authority, of imposed hierarchical social order. We had 2.5 centuries of that, and we have a beautiful record of that. It's the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read it as somebody who's trying to be cognitively empathetic with the people of that time, you start to see a contrast to the popular Christianity that we can all observe in Western culture.
No, that's beautifully put. And I like the way the book is laid out.
Okay.
You walk through groupings of the Stations of the Cross and correlate them to specific lessons, and then you, as you said earlier, don't just stick with that story, but call forth various other portions of the Bible and various passages to reinforce your point, which is very cool. Earlier in the book, you introduce a concept and then you hammer it home a bunch, and I wanted to ask you more about it. You
Sure.
associate citizenship, the bad thing, with adherence to hierarchies and their rules, especially when those rules conflict with neighborliness.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe flesh out how you think about that. Because I don't have a problem with hierarchies in the slightest. I think they're a natural result of what happens when humans voluntarily, aggregate,
Agreed.
associate. The problem is when that's done through force. That's the wrong sort of hierarchy. So, do you have a problem with hierarchies in general, or do you?
No, not at all. For the reasons you just gave. That's why I always put the word imposed. Right. It's the imposed hierarchical social order that's a problem. I write in the very first Substack article that I published that is off of this book. I wrote in there, the authority of personhood, of conscience, and of proprietorship all exist and are just, honorable, and defensible. But any attempt to assert an alleged authority to initiate violations of anyone else's natural human rights is unjust. And I go through the fact that, yes, we all have hierarchies of values. Those are quite natural. You're supposed to. There are hierarchies of proprietorship. And these are also part of a careful reading of the Gospels, of the recorded ministry of Jesus. Jesus talks a great deal about stewardship. Okay, stewardship is understanding that when you're entrusted with someone else's property, you, in a sense, owe that person something to take care of what they've entrusted you with. So hierarchies of proprietorship are real. Hierarchies of values are real. Hierarchies of competence are real.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are better at things than other people are. And a person A being better at person B at one thing, person B could be better at person A at some other thing. So hierarchies are found in nature. They are imminently natural, and they're part of the idea of having a value structure. So I'm with you 100% that hierarchies are not bad things in and of themselves. Violence is a bad thing in and of itself.
No, for sure.
And it's fact that you can't get away from violence in a coercive civil authority. I mean, it's the definition of a government is a monopoly violence institution. That's the problem.
The anatomy of the state, so to speak.
There you go.
No, I totally agree. Where do you come down on the defensive use of force?
I come down on the defensive use of force that if you choose to use defensive force, it should be to prevent the attack that's happening, not some sort of vengeance taking.
Sure.
Or revenge. A passage that gets very often misunderstood back from the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures, is eye for an eye. And people think, oh, what a terrible thing that is to say an eye for an eye. It was actually a limit placed on people in the sense that if somebody did something to you, your defensive force, or back then retaliatory force, could not be greater than what was done to you. It was to prevent escalation. So I'm a big fan of de-escalating situations that could become violent. And some force may be necessary to do that. So I maybe the word is pacifist, where you just I'm very much of the understanding that to be a Christian is not to be a doormat.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to let everybody walk all over you. And I go through that in one of the stations in the book as well. Going through probably the most misinterpreted passages in the Gospels, the turn the other cheek, give the person your cloak, and go the extra mile, that those are actually about dignified defiance.
Yeah, I didn't know that until I read those portions in your
Right.
book.
That's the wonderful nugget that comes from digging into some of the history.
Yeah.
And understanding what those cultural references are. Remember, the Bible's not written to me. It's written to who it's written to. Now, I can read it provided I have a good translation, but the lessons I glean from it are enhanced by me understanding to whom it was written and what those cultural references are. History, culture, and context is very, very important when looking at older texts, especially deep, rich texts like, say, the Gospels are.
Totally agree. And if they hold truth in them, it should be the sort of thing that's principle based and timeless, such that
Yes.
you can apply them to your own context, even though we live in a far different world.
Yes.
We are the same species.
We still are, aren't we? Despite
yes,
some people
yes, we
trying to
are.
muck around with that.
I mean, they do try, don't they? I had another interesting question, or I thought it was
Sure.
interesting. This is from later in the book as well, page 45. You say, yes, the world is awash in the calamities of good citizenship, the distorting of status, loyalty, and validation, the exalting of coercive civil authority, the outsourcing of ethics, the justifying of violence and hate. But the story doesn't have to end there, which is very inspiring. But I wanted to ask you what exactly you meant by the outsourcing of ethics. I assume you mean to the state, or do you mean, what did you mean by that specific little clause?
To anything. It harkens back to the introduction when I talked about good citizens outsourcing their ethics. I was recently introduced to the writings of Rene Girard, who builds on mimesis from a Christian anthropological perspective, similar to how Richard Dawkins coined the term meme and looked at that from an evolutionary biological perspective. And I think Dawkins is brilliant. And being introduced to Girard, one of the first things I said was, oh, Dawkins really fills in some of the blanks here. And I think really fills out what you need to when you read Girard and anthropology. Copycat culture is real.
Sure.
Children act on emotion and imitation. And a lot of times we don't outgrow that as we get older. So there's a sense in which we outsource so much of our thinking. And to the extent that ethics is your intellectual understanding of your behavior and how to treat others, ethics is outsourcing thinking. So, all the people that we railed against during, can I say COVID, or is this going on a platform where people will strike you for COVID?
You can say whatever you want.
There you go. So, so as we saw during COVID, that urge to just listen to the people on TV who have fancy titles and who claim they have a fancy credential, that's real. And it's not just a matter of, well, I'm just getting information from them. People are outsourcing how they are supposed to behave and how they are supposed to view and treat other people.
Mm-hmm.
I think telling people that the outsourcing of ethics happens, to me, that's the least arguable, least disputable point I make.
No, I think it's clearly true. And it's so interesting. It's part of the design, really. I mean, obviously, when you're young, you are completely filled with information through your parents and your community. And
Yes.
then as you become a juvenile, you're supposed to become an expert in following the herd, basically. But as you
swing
become
way
an
to the other
adult,
side of the pendulum, right?
sure, but the point of, you must become an expert at your society. And then as you mature, what being an adult is, to my mind, is therefore having the grounding to examine that society and think for yourself about it.
Yes.
So it's you got to do both. You've got to be able to follow the herd, otherwise you're just, some sort of narcissistic malcontent or whatever. But then you also have to have the wherewithal to think for yourself, and it's hard. So okay, if we
Agreed,
don't,
100%. Yes, I think I tell people that rationality is when you grasp your circumstances. And we even speak about it in those terms. I grasp this, I can get my hands around it. Rationality is when you grasp your circumstances. Emotionality is when your circumstances grasp you. And maturity is when you can flip that switch, when you can figure out, okay, I'm being grasped here. I need to switch this and start exerting my own willpower, my own attentiveness, my own mental effort, and start grasping what's happening to me. It also means you can flip the switch in the other direction. Because if you tend towards hyper rationalism, you need to be able to recognize that in yourself and flip to the other direction and say, gosh, I need to loosen up. I need some leakier margins here. I need to be open to some new information. So maturity is the ability to switch. And you described it so wonderfully growing up. You as a kid, you don't have a lot of knowledge. So you're just a sponge in a sense. You're acting on emotion and imitation. And then as you get to a teenager, you really start to understand that there are incentives to going along with things. And then, so you start to grasp what's happening, but you're still locked in. Okay, there are incentives to following the herd. Like peer pressure becomes not only something you feel, but it's something you can cognizate, you can intellectualize, you can reason about. And so maturity is being able to say, okay, what if I take my rational, logical abilities and don't just use them for what everybody else wants me to do? What if I challenge? What if I confront? What if I notice a conflict? And those are signs of maturity, and that's where we have to go. I think
these are the issues we have to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, these are the issues we have to grapple with.
Yeah,
it was sort of a follow-up question, like, where do you get your ethics from? But I found a passage that inspired another question that's really related. I won't read the whole thing, but you mentioned something you call the God-centered order. And my question is, I have a guess is what your answer is, but how is the individual to know what is a God-centered order, and what should that individual do if the expert class, maybe the priestly class, disagree? Are you inclined to think that prayer is the way to reveal God's will over the received wisdom of some church official? Or just how do you think about that? Obviously, order is important. Understanding what is good and what is bad is important. How do you answer those questions for yourself?
For order, I think order is good, but I don't think order is always good. In fact, I'd like to describe Jesus as good chaos, because the people who oppose him are all the law and order types. It's all the control freaks. It's all the hyper rationalists, and they don't oppose him because he's a rival law and order type. He's a rival control freak. They oppose him because he undermines them and they don't know what to do with him. He confuses the heck out of them. So I think part of a God-centered order, first of all, who is your God? The Bible is not God. The church hierarchy is not God to me. These are the Bible is a tool. I like to tell people the map is not the terrain. And the
say that all
Bible
the
is a
time.
map, right?
Yeah.
The Bible is a map. It's a very good map. It's an extremely comprehensive map. And if you know how to read the key to the map, it's very, very helpful, but it's still a map. It's not the terrain. The terrain is your own soul. A church is a community. It's a support system. It's also how you live out your call to shared faith. You know, your faith, your connection to God is not supposed to be just for you. If you have a genuine faith, it's supposed to color how you view and interact with other people. So your church community is your opportunity to share your faith and the opportunity for others to share their faith with you. It's a support group. It can be a place to learn. It's a place to encounter other people's experiences in hopefully a framework that is aligned with your higher values. So the first question is, who or what is your God? And if your God is, I like to use the shorthand of Marduk, Marduk, the old Mesopotamian god of imposed order. Marduk defeats the chaos monster and carves up and makes the world out of defeating the chaos. So it's a long-standing human psychological aspect that we value imposed order, not revealed order, not spontaneous order, as us anarcho-capitalists like to acknowledge. Like there's a spontaneous order out there, but imposed order. So if your God is imposed order, and you've just given Marduk a new name of Jesus,
Right.
then that's where you're going to think is your God ordered. You may just listen to, the clergy, no matter what they say. You may not be able to process it in a meaningful and mature way yourself. My God is a God who wants me to develop my conscience. That's one of the big lessons of Jesus. You know, when Jesus uses simple things for people, he's using them because that's where people are and he's trying to meet them there. He's trying to reach people where they are, but he's constantly calling people to make more of an effort to outgrow that simple copycat behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So my God is a God that wants me to develop my conscience. My God is a God that I think implants human dignity, because I believe in the transcendent, and I know not everybody does. I believe human dignity, that innate worth, I think that comes from our glimpse of the transcendent. And so I recognize a human dignity that comes to each individual person. It's not a group characteristic that we can only partake in if we're part of a group. I think it's an individual characteristic in the individual, what the Greeks would call psyche, what then gets translated soul. I think they're very much related.
No, I totally agree. The only qualification I would make is that we are a group species. So even though all these attributes of the hierarchy of good and evil, these are all personal traits. I don't think you can fully actualize as a human being without having strong group relationships.
I believe Jesus agrees with you.
Yeah.
I believe the Gospels agree with you 100%. The call is to be the good neighbor in the world. Like, you're not a good neighbor if you don't have a neighbor.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Maybe you don't commit any.
We are social beings.
Exactly. The best you could do is like maybe make it so that, living as a hermit, you can't commit any of the sins that some people commit against other people, but you're just truncating. You're not actualizing.
No, the book is not good hermit beds.
Exactly. Exactly.
So yes, the Gospels are very much a call to be with other people, be amongst other human beings. And how do you do that?
No, I totally agree. Do you believe that a good Christian doesn't have any business holding a position in a coercive civil society? Do you think they should reject the coercive monopolistic government entirely? I mean, what I'm saying is, do you think that it is in accordance with Christian principles, understood correctly, to be a voluntarist and anarcho-capitalist and not think that force has any proper role in a good society?
The record of the early church is to say yes. If you were a member of, say, the Roman army and wanted to become Christian, you had to leave the Roman army.
Wow.
You could not hold positions in society where, you were trying to justify violence against people by saying, well, this is my title and I have this position. That's why the Constantine flipping of incentives is such a huge deal to me.
That's for sure.
So I think the early church says yes, and I say yes as well. I'm not pursuing political office. People have told me, like, you should run for office because I have views about economics and about liberty and whatnot. Hey, you should run for office. I'd say I'd sabotage the place.
Well,
if I got into office, I'd be sabotaging the place.
I'm not saying that I'm not saying that what I'm about to say has anything to do with your last comment, but I am heavily involved in the Libertarian Party.
Okay.
And
party is one thing. You didn't ask about party. You asked about actually holding a position where you're coercing people and now either giving the orders or implementing the violence yourself as a law enforcer. So I don't have a problem with parties.
Yeah,
I just cut you off. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I get excited.
No problem. No, I was asking just a general question, like should you enter, with relish and oomph to try and instill your values in other people. I worship the people that enter the state with the intention of dismantling it. Ron Paul's my hero. He didn't want to be in government. He wanted to get rid of it. And
right. And people kept electing him.
Well, yeah. I mean,
what was the story that he ran just to sort of have a platform for his views and he won?
It was because Nixon closed the gold window, I believe. And he'd studied enough economics to know, oh my goodness, that last tether to something real, making it a complete fiat currency, is going to destroy the currency eventually and maybe the nation. So he just ran to talk about that. And as he tells a famous story, as the campaign was going along, his wife says, you're in a little bit of danger here. What if you win?
Yeah.
And that's what happened. And
he was a rural, country doctor, doing wonderful things for people. Yeah, he's about to win.
This is great, Dominic. We're winding down a little bit. I have more questions for you, but I want to put them behind my paywall at heymannature.substack.com. There'll be a link in the description. But before we move this conversation to deeper water, where I'm, by the way, going to take you to task for your opinions on a Star Trek-related issue. But before we go there, why don't you point people to your Substack or any other place where people can talk to you more about this thing you are passionate about?
You can search for Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen on Substack. It's all together. It's a very, the very long URL, Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen, no punctuation, no underscores, no anything. .substack.com, or just search for the keywords. I think I'm the only Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen there at the moment. You can search for Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen, the book, on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, or on Lulu.com. If you like ebooks, Amazon offers the Kindle version. Barnes & Noble offers the Nook version. If you like paperbacks, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Lulu offer paperbacks to you. I mean,
nice.
For your viewers there, the audio-video version of the podcast, it's a very small book. It's a very thin book. It was barely enough pages for Amazon to give it a spine.
No kidding.
Had it been 60 pages or under, they would just staple it down the middle like it's a magazine. So I'm sitting there going, oh my goodness, how do I get this up to 62 pages at least? And so I was able to do it. I beefed it up with an appendix and with an afterword, and
well, I can
those things. I got to like 64 pages. So it's the body of the book, introduction, 5 chapters. Concluding section is slightly under 10,000 words. The average adult reads about 230 a minute. This is a 45-minute read. If you want to go slow, it's still going to be not much more than an hour. If you want to use it as, say, a meditative aid and really chew on it, it's the kind of thing you can use as a meditative aid. You can read it for a variety of purposes. It won't take up all day. I keep the same The same mantra for my Substack. All the articles are under 1,000 words, so this is a 5-minute read. Every
Yeah,
Wednesday I publish. I notice you do that as well. I enjoy your Substack articles. I notice that you like to get to the point and not to take everybody's entire morning or afternoon when you write as well. So we are kindred spirits in the get to the point, have something to say and say it well and say it right away, and then put a period on it and finish.
Yeah, I try to be very cognizant of how much people are just besieged by things demanding their attention. So
Yep.
people are nice enough to give me theirs. I want to give them something to think about and be quick. And yeah, I want to underscore, I thought your book was great.
Thank you.
Obviously, I appreciated it more for educational purposes, the reflections on, political philosophy, what it means to, what duty you owe yourself and your neighbors, and what relationships you should have. But I think people who are Christians or who are more spiritual, quote unquote, than me, will really have a lot to grapple with in it and find it very, very nourishing and persuasive. So I encourage people to go check that out. We'll put a link in the video description. We're going to sign off now, but go to heymannature.substack.com, and if you become a paid subscriber, you will be able to see the rest of this interview, which is going to be a banger.
All right.
Thanks. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll talk to you later.